Priya Okafor was 36 years old when she found the second phone charging behind the guest room dresser, hidden under a folded towel like a secret with its own drawer. It wasn't her husband's usual charger. It was pink. She stood there holding it for a long time, listening to Dean laugh downstairs on a work call that didn't sound like work at all. She didn't confront him that night. She put the charger back exactly where she found it, folded the towel the same way, and went downstairs to finish making dinner like nothing in her chest had just cracked open. It took her 4 more days to work up the nerve to ask him directly. 4 days of watching him kiss her goodbye on the cheek, 4 days of watching him text under the table at dinner and turn the screen away, 4 days of telling herself she was imagining things, that 15 years of marriage had earned her the benefit of the doubt. On the 5th day, she asked, "Whose phone is that in the guest room, Dean?" He didn't even look up from his plate. "What phone?" "The pink one, behind the dresser." His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. For 1 second, one honest second, she saw something flicker across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by the calm, condescending smile she'd learned to hate over the last 2 years. "You've been going through the guest room now. That's a new low, even for you. Answer the question." He set his fork down slowly, deliberately, the way he did when he wanted her to know she was about to be lectured. "It's a work phone. For the Bristol account. I keep sensitive client stuff separate." "It's pink, Dean." It was the only one in stock. She laughed. She couldn't help it. It came out sharp and humorless, and it seemed to genuinely surprise him, like he hadn't expected her to have anything left in her that could still push back. "You think I'm stupid," she said. "I think," he said, leaning back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest like he owned the room, the house, the marriage, and everything inside it, "that you've been looking for a reason to blow this up for a while now. And honestly, if you're that unhappy, Priya, if you really think something's going on, leave. Go ahead. Pack a bag tonight. See how far you get without my name on everything you touch. If you've ever had someone dare you to leave because they were certain you had nowhere else to go, you already know exactly what Priya was feeling in that kitchen. Hit subscribe right now, because Dean Reyes has no idea what's coming for him, and I promise you, by the end of this story, you're going to wish you could watch his face in person. Priya had met Dean when she was 24, a software engineer 3 years out of college with a half-built app idea and a laptop covered in sticky notes. Dean was charming back then, ambitious in a way that felt exciting instead of exhausting. He didn't code. He didn't design, but he talked to investors like he'd built the thing himself, and somewhere in the excitement of watching her idea turn into an actual company, Priya had let him become the face of it. Vantix Analytics, a data platform she had written from scratch over 11 months of sleepless nights, sitting at her kitchen table with cold coffee and a dream that felt too big for the tiny apartment she was renting. Dean had handled the pitch decks, the handshakes, the investor dinners. She had handled the code, every single line of it, the architecture, the algorithms, the parts nobody else in the company could actually explain if you asked them to. For the first 6 years, that division of labor had felt like a partnership. Somewhere around year 7, Dean had started introducing himself at conferences as the founder, just the founder, singular. Priya had corrected him the first few times, gently in front of people, and watched him get quietly furious about it in the car afterward. "You make it sound like I don't do anything," he'd said once, gripping the steering wheel too tight. "I built the relationships that got this company funded. I built the brand. You'd still be sitting in a 1-bedroom apartment if it weren't for me." She had believed that for a while. She had let herself believe it long enough that when he suggested restructuring the company 2 years ago, cleaner cap table, better positioning for a future acquisition, he'd said, she hadn't asked as many questions as she should have. "Answer the question," Priya said again now, standing in her kitchen with a stranger's phone charger still warm from the memory of finding it. "Whose phone?" Dean stood up from the table, pushing his chair back hard enough that it scraped against the floor. "You know what your problem is? You've never once been able to just trust me. 15 years, Priya, and you still act like I'm some kind of suspect in my own house." "Then tell me her name." Something behind his eyes went cold and flat. There is no her. There's always a her, Dean. There's a pink phone in the guest room with a passcode I don't have. Tell me her name. He grabbed his jacket off the back of the chair. I'm not doing this tonight. He was already walking toward the garage, already pulling his keys from his pocket, already halfway out the door of a conversation he clearly had no intention of finishing. Late meeting, don't wait up. The garage door rumbled shut behind him. Priya stood in the kitchen alone, the dinner going cold on the table, and for the first time in 2 years, something inside her that had been quietly, patiently waiting finally sat up and started paying attention. Before we go further, if this story is already making your blood boil a little, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight, and smash that like button, because what Priya finds next is going to make you want to stand up and cheer. She didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open until almost 2 a.m., not looking for the mistress. She already knew enough about that to fill in the blanks herself, but looking at something she hadn't touched in 2 years. The Vantix cap table, the ownership documents, the restructuring paperwork Dean had pushed through during what he'd called a routine cleanup before the Series C round. She remembered signing those documents. She remembered being tired, distracted, 3 weeks into a product launch that had consumed her entire life, and Dean sliding a stack of papers across the table with a post-it note on top that said, "Just formalities, sign where I flagged." She remembered trusting him enough not to read every page. Now at 2 a.m., with her whole marriage rearranging itself in her head, she read every page. Dean had restructured the company's equity so that he held 62% as CEO and majority shareholder. Priya, the woman who had written every line of code the platform still ran on, held 18%, listed simply as Chief Technology Officer, non-voting Class B. The rest was scattered across 2 investors, and she noticed with a slow, sick feeling in her stomach a name she didn't recognize, Whitney Sorrell, 6%, listed as Strategic Advisor. Priya searched the name. LinkedIn came up first. A woman in her early 30s, sharp blazer, professional headshot, title, VP of Growth, Vantix Analytics. A role Priya had never once heard discussed in a board meeting. A role that, according to the woman's own profile, she'd held for 14 months. 14 months. The same amount of time, Priya realized with her hands going cold on the keyboard, that Dean had been working late 3 or 4 nights a week. She closed the laptop. She sat in the dark kitchen and let herself feel it, all of it, the betrayal, the years, the way she had quietly shrunk herself down inside her own company to keep the peace at home. And then, the way she always did when something broke, she got up, made a cup of tea, and started making a list. She called her older sister, Adiz. At 6 a.m. Adiz was a corporate litigator who'd been telling Priya for 2 years that something felt off about the restructuring, and Priya had brushed her off every single time. "You were right," Priya said the moment Adiz picked up. "About what?" "All of it. Dean's been sleeping with a woman named Whitney Sorrell, who somehow has a strategic advisor title and 6% equity in my company. I need you to look at something." There was a pause, then the sound of Adiz sitting up in bed, fully awake now. "Send me the cap table. Send me everything from the restructuring 2 years ago. Don't say anything to him yet. Priya, I mean it, not one word. I already asked him about the phone last night." "Okay, that's fine. That's just a phone. Just don't let him know you're looking at the paperwork. Give me 24 hours. Priya went to work that morning like nothing had happened. She sat through a product review, approved a sprint plan, fixed a bug in the recommendation engine that had been bothering her for a week. And the whole time, some quiet, sharpened part of her mind was somewhere else entirely, turning the numbers over, waiting. Dean came home that evening in a good mood, humming under his breath, dropping his laptop bag by the door like a man who had no idea his entire life was about to be read back to him line by line. He kissed her cheek. He asked what was for dinner. He talked, for 20 full minutes, about a funding call that had gone really well, and Priya nodded along and asked exactly the right follow-up questions and gave away absolutely nothing. If you're the kind of person who loves watching someone get exactly what's coming to them, you're going to want to stay for the next part. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button now, because Dean Reyes is about to learn that the woman he underestimated for 15 years was taking notes the whole time. Adiz called back 2 days later, and what she'd found was worse than either of them had expected. The restructuring wasn't just about equity, Adiz said, her voice carrying the particular calm she used when she was furious and trying not to show it. Priya, he changed the IP assignment clause. The original founding documents, the ones from when you two first incorporated, list you as sole inventor and owner of the core Vantix algorithm, personally, before it was ever assigned to the company. That's standard. That's how most startups work. Okay. The restructuring 2 years ago includes a new clause. It reassigns all intellectual property, including the original algorithm, directly to Vantix Analytics as a corporate asset, with no individual inventor rights retained. You signed that away, Priya, or someone got you to sign it. Priya felt her stomach drop. So the algorithm isn't mine anymore, legally. According to this document, no, it's the company's. And since Dean holds majority control of the company, he owns my work. He owns the company that owns your work, which, practically speaking, given his voting control, means yes. Priya sat with that for a long moment, staring at nothing, feeling 15 years of trust rearrange itself into something that looked, in hindsight, less like love and more like a very long con. There has to be something, she said finally. My father made me get independent counsel before I signed anything with Dean back at the very beginning, before we even incorporated. Some kind of, I don't know, some kind of side agreement. He was paranoid about exactly this. Your father was a patent attorney, Adiz said slowly. Priya, do you still have any of that original paperwork, before the company, before Dean was involved at all? Priya's mind went somewhere far away, a small apartment, a proud, careful man sitting across from her with a folder in his hands. Her father, dead 6 years now, but his voice was suddenly very clear in her memory. I have his files, she said, in storage. I never went through all of it after he passed. I couldn't. I think you need to go through it tonight. The storage unit was cold and smelled like dust and cardboard. Priya sat on the concrete floor at 10 at night with a single overhead bulb buzzing above her, going through box after box of her father's old files, her hands shaking, not from the cold. She found it in the fourth box, a manila folder with her name on it in her father's careful handwriting. Inside, a provisional patent application, filed personally by her, not by Vantix, not by any company, 4 full months before she had even met Dean. The core algorithm, the one thing every version of the company had been built around, filed and protected under her name alone, with her father listed as her attorney of record, long before any restructuring clause could have touched it. She remembered him telling her, back when she was 23 and impatient and didn't want to spend the money. Patent it yourself first, Margaret. He always used her middle name when he was being serious. Before you ever bring in a partner, a company, anyone. Whatever you build after this, on top of this, they can own. But the seed of it, the thing you actually invented, that stays yours. Nobody can restructure something that was never theirs to restructure. The provisional patent had converted to a full utility patent 3 years ago. Priya Adiz Okafor, sole inventor, sole owner. A patent that predated the company, predated the marriage restructuring, predated Whitney Sorrell's 6% and Dean's 62. The entire Vantix platform, the algorithm that powered every dollar of revenue, every investor pitch, every glowing press mention, was running on technology the company had never actually owned. It had only ever had an implied license, granted informally by Priya, revocable the instant she said so. She sat on that concrete floor and started to laugh, quiet and disbelieving, tears streaming down her face at the same time. Because her father, dead 6 years, had just handed her the exact weapon she needed from beyond the grave. Stay with me here, because this next part is exactly why this channel exists. Comment the word Vantix below if you're rooting for Priya right now, and if you haven't subscribed yet, do it before the next scene, because Dean is about to walk into the biggest meeting of his career, standing on a foundation that was never his. She met with a patent attorney the next morning, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Farah Simmons who read through everything twice before looking up with something close to a smile. "This is clean," Farah said. "Airtight, honestly. The company's use of this algorithm has only ever been an implied, revocable license, because there's no written licensing agreement anywhere in these restructuring documents. Your husband's attorneys made a huge assumption when they drafted that IP reassignment clause. They assumed the algorithm belonged to the company because it was used by the company, but you never actually transferred the patent. You can't accidentally transfer a patent, Priya. It requires an explicit, signed assignment. This document reassigns all intellectual property developed during the course of employment. Your patent wasn't developed during your employment. It predates the company by 4 months. So if I revoke the license..." "If you revoke the license," Farah said, "Vantix Analytics loses the legal right to operate its core product immediately. Every version of the platform, every client contract that depends on that algorithm, gone overnight, unless they can either rebuild the technology from scratch, which would take them years, or negotiate a new license with you directly, on your terms." Priya thought about Dean standing in the kitchen 2 nights ago, arms folded, telling her to go ahead and leave, telling her she had nowhere else to go. "When's the Series C closing?" she asked. Farah checked the funding announcement Priya had pulled up on her phone. 12 days, big investor presentation. From what I'm seeing here, looks like they're planning to announce the round live. Priya felt something settle into place inside her chest, calm and certain. "I want to be in that room when it happens." For the next 12 days, Priya said nothing. She went to work. She sat in meetings across the table from Dean and gave nothing away. She smiled at Whitney Sorrell in the hallway, who had apparently decided that professional coldness was the same thing as discretion, and let her enjoy every second of thinking she'd won. 3 days before the presentation, Priya finally told her sister everything was ready. Farah had drafted the formal notice of license revocation, time to take legal effect the moment the funding announcement went public. The exact moment Dean would be standing in front of a room full of investors, promising them a technology he no longer had any right to use. The morning of the presentation, Dean was almost giddy over breakfast, scrolling through his phone, barely looking at her. "Big day today," he said. $90 million valuation if this goes the way I think it will." He glanced up at her, something almost pitying in his expression. "You should be excited, Priya. This is good for both of us." "I'm sure it'll be memorable," she said, and meant it more than he could possibly know. The presentation was held in a glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor. A dozen investors seated around a long table, coffee and pastries untouched in front of most of them. All eyes on the screen where Dean stood in a tailored navy suit, clicker in hand, radiating the exact confidence of a man who believed he had already won. "Vantix Analytics isn't just a data platform," Dean said, gesturing at the slide behind him. "It's a fundamentally new approach to predictive modeling, built from the ground up by a team I've spent 15 years assembling." He didn't once glance toward the back of the room, where Priya stood quietly near the door, a single folder in her hands. "Today, I'm thrilled to announce our Series C round has officially closed at $92 million, led by..." Priya's phone buzzed, a single text from Farah, "Filed, effective now." She stepped forward. "Before you finish that sentence, Dean," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the quiet room, "there's something these investors need to know." Every head turned. Dean's smile flickered, confusion crossing his face before recognition set in, and with it, something close to fear. "Priya now really isn't." "As of 1 minute ago," she said, walking toward the front of the room, "Vantix Analytics no longer holds a valid license to use the core predictive algorithm that powers this entire platform. That algorithm is protected under United States Patent 9,847,213, filed and owned solely by me, personally, 4 months before this company was ever incorporated." A ripple moved through the investors. Someone near the front pulled out their phone. That's absurd, Dean said, his voice climbing. The restructuring 2 years ago assigned all IP to the company you signed. I signed a document that reassigns intellectual property developed during my employment, Priya said, holding up the folder. This patent predates my employment by 4 months. It was never the company's to reassign, because it was never the company's to begin with. Every dollar of revenue this platform has ever generated has been running on technology I personally own, under an informal license that I am revoking, effective immediately. You're bluffing, Dean said, but his voice had lost every bit of its polish. I emailed formal notice to your general counsel and to every investor on today's call list 8 minutes ago, Farah said calmly, stepping into the doorway behind Priya. You'll find it in your inbox now. Phones came out across the table. Someone muttered something about liability. The lead investor, a silver-haired man who hadn't said a word yet, looked at Dean with an expression that had gone very cold very fast. Is this true? He asked. Is there a licensing agreement anywhere in this cap table for the core patent? Dean opened his mouth. Nothing came out. There isn't, Priya said, because there was never supposed to need to be one. I trusted my husband. If you've made it this far, you already know Dean never stood a chance. Hit subscribe right now. If you're loving watching him, realize it in real time. And drop a comment telling me the exact moment you knew Priya had already won. The room dissolved into chaos, investors pulling aside associates, the lead investor already on his phone with legal. Dean crossed the room toward Priya, his voice dropping into something desperate. You can't do this. 15 years, Priya, this is our company. It was never ours, she said quietly. You made sure of that yourself 2 years ago. When you decided 18% and a non-voting title were enough for the person who built it. You just never checked what I owned before you ever put a pen in my hand. He stared at her, and for one long moment, 15 years passed silently between them. What happens now? He asked. Now, Priya said, closing the folder, I license the technology to whoever I choose, on my terms. And Whitney can keep her 6% of a company that's about to be worth a great deal less than it was 10 minutes ago. 6 months later, Priya launched a new company from a small office 2 blocks from her old apartment. The same algorithm now properly, legally, entirely hers, licensed to 3 new partners on terms her father would have been proud of. Vantix Analytics collapsed under investor lawsuits within the year. Dean, according to people who still talk to Priya, was last seen doing sales consulting for a mid-sized software firm that had never heard of Vantix at all. If Priya's story hit you the way it hit me telling it, do 3 things before you go. Hit like on this video, drop a comment with the moment that made you gasp, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story of someone who got underestimated and came back stronger than anyone ever thought possible. I'll see you in the next one.